The sun hung low like a tired lantern over Sunawee, casting long, orange shadows over dust that moved like ghosts between wagon wheels and bootsteps. The auction yard was loud in all the wrong ways. Slaps of hands on flesh, cracked laughter. Men with coin-stuffed pouches weighing their worth in other people's dignity. She stood barefoot on the block, back straight, a child pressed close to her leg. He couldn't have been older than 5. His cheek was mottled with the yellow bloom of an old bruise, and his eyes were too still for a boy. She had her arms wrapped around him like she feared he might vanish, dissolve into dust, or be swallowed by the crowd. Her dress was plain, colorless with wear, hanging off shoulders too narrow, but her chin didn't drop. The auctioneer's voice cracked out above the crowd like a whip. Woman and child. Indenture remainder, 10 months. Debt owed $32. Opening bid, 20. No one moved. No one blinked. A horse snorted near the back. Someone chuckled. One man called, "Only thing she knows how to raise is her skirt." Laughter. The boy flinched. She didn't. Her eyes were fixed beyond the crowd, somewhere beyond the boundary of fields and fences. 15, the auctioneer said, voice already faltering. 10. Nothing. Even the wind had the decency to hush. A few feet back, leaning against a split-rail fence, Elias Boone watched. His hat was low, pulled forward to shade his weather-worn face, and a rifle leaned against his leg, though his hand was still. Elias Boone hadn't spoken more than 3 words at once in a decade. His silence was legend. His ranch was the last place west of the creek where fences were straight and wolves didn't wander. And yet, for all the stories, he never came to town unless it was planting season or the mule needed shoeing. That day, he had no mule with him, just a satchel and a pocketful of reasons only he knew. The child coughed once, dry rasping. She shifted slightly, putting her body between him and the crowd. The auctioneer wiped his forehead. $5, he tried. Folks, come on now. She's a hard worker. Boy can carry water. Elias Boone lifted a hand. No flourish. No movement beyond a raised palm. A murmur rippled. People turned. Whispers crawled across the yard like smoke. Boone. After all these years, he's lost his mind. The auctioneer coughed, grateful to end it. Sold for $5. She stepped down from a platform, gripping the boy's hand. Her face gave nothing away. No thanks, no relief. Just the same hard stillness that had kept her upright. She approached Elias slowly. He didn't speak, just looked at the boy, then at her, and gave a single nod toward the edge of the yard, where his horse waited tethered. The boy hesitated until Elias moved, slow and steady, and lifted him into the saddle. The child clung to the horn, knees wobbling, but his gaze never left Elias. She swung up behind the boy, settling herself with a grace too clean for someone worn so thin. "You'll ride," Elias said. "Horse'll know the way." She opened her mouth, closed it. Then finally she nodded. They passed through town with a slow clop of hooves on frozen earth. Every set of eyes followed them like wolves that hadn't decided whether to pounce or wait. A woman in a pressed blue coat crossed the street to avoid them. A man outside the barber's shop spat in the dirt and said something Elias didn't care to hear. They passed the church, its doors propped open. The preacher, tall and red-faced, stepped forward, blocking their path for half a heartbeat. "Elias," he said. "A word." Elias stopped, looked at him. The preacher cleared his throat. "You bring shame into your home. It will find the corners you forgot to guard." Elias stared a beat longer. Then he said, "This ain't your home, and I got no use for sermons I didn't ask for." The preacher stepped aside, jaw tight. The horse continued. By the time they reached Boone's ranch, the sun had sunk behind the cottonwoods, and the world was all long shadows and quiet breath. She slid off first, lifting the boy down before he could jump. Elias opened the barn door. "You'll sleep there for now," he said. "Blankets inside. Bread's on the table in the house. Take what you need." She looked at him then, not surprised, but puzzled. "Why?" she asked. Elias didn't answer right away. He removed the saddle, hung it up. Only after the horse was stabled and the gate latched did he speak. "I saw his face," he said simply. That night, he placed a bowl of milk, a wedge of cheese, and a knife-bladed loaf of bread on a tin tray and left it just inside the barn. He didn't knock. Just set it down and stepped back into the cold. Inside the barn, she watched him from behind stacked hay, the boy sleeping on her lap. When she finally moved to the tray, her fingers shook. Not from fear, from the weight of unexpected kindness. In his house, Elias sat beside the fire, the rifle leaning beside the door. He stared into the flames like they held a language only he understood. Outside, snow had begun to fall, just a whisper of it, white dust over dry fields. In town, people would speak his name like it was a riddle. But out there, beneath that roof, in the hush between frost and fire, a boy had eaten his fill, and a woman had not been touched nor questioned. And Elias Boone, the man who never raised his voice and never made promises, had made a beginning he didn't yet understand. The frost held on longer than usual that year, stubborn and mean. Each morning came edged with silver, each breath a pale ghost in the air. But inside the barn, the boy began to hum. It wasn't a tune exactly, just little rising notes that fluttered up and vanished, like smoke from a match. She didn't stop him. He was smiling when he did it, even just a little. And smiles had been rare, for so long they felt like things worth preserving. The ranch woke early. Elias rose before the sun, boots thudding softly across floorboards, kettle set to boil with practiced ease. He made 3 cups of coffee now, one weaker, laced with milk. He never said who it was for, just placed it near the edge of the table where small fingers could reach. The boy took to following him. He never asked permission, just fell into Elias's shadow like he'd always belonged there. He watched everything. How Elias tied twine, how he patched a fence, how he salted meat, all without words. His mother kept her distance at first. She did the laundry without being asked, scrubbed dishes clean even when no one ate off them, and swept dust from corners that hadn't been touched in years. Every motion was efficient, as if her usefulness was armor. Elias didn't interfere. He didn't instruct her, didn't thank her, just watched. One morning, she caught the boy outside, fumbling with Elias's axe. His small hands could barely lift it, let alone swing it properly. She rushed forward, heart kicking. But Elias was already there, stepping behind the boy. Hands here, he said, voice soft as wood smoke. Spread wide. Let the weight do the work. The boy looked up at him, uncertain. Elias nodded. Try again. The blade fell off center, splintering instead of splitting. The boy's lip trembled. He looked down at the ruined log. Again, Elias said. This time, it landed true. A clean split. The boy's smile was quiet but wide. Later that evening, Elias found his old coat laid across the porch rail. Its sleeves had been hemmed small. Stitched into it was a patch from her dress, the faded blue one she wore on the day of the auction. He didn't comment, just picked it up and set it inside. In town, the whispers had grown teeth. She heard them at the general store. Women drawing their shawls closer when she passed. A man laughed too loud and said, Boone finally needed a woman, so bad he bought one. She ignored it. But later, alone at the well behind the house, she cried quietly, not out of shame, but because her boy had called Elias sir that morning, and Elias had smiled. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, neither owned nor free, neither wife nor stranger. She still hadn't told Elias the boy's name. It wasn't to keep secrets. It was to hold on to something still hers. That night, Elias left a pair of boots by the barn door. Small, sturdy, meant to be grown into. The boy wore them before dawn. At breakfast, he sat straighter, wore the boots like medals. You like 'em? Elias asked, half smiling. The boy nodded. Thank you, Mr. Boone. The woman flinched, just slightly, hearing the name spoken aloud. Like a door creaked open too wide. Later that week, a knock came at the ranch gate. The preacher stood there with his leather Bible, eyes tight. Elias met him, as always, without hurry. You mean to marry her? The preacher asked, glancing toward the house. No, Elias said simply. You mean to keep her here? She's not livestock. The preacher frowned. Folk talk. They see a woman sleep in your barn, raise a child in your name. What are they to think? They'll think, Elias said, whatever lets them sleep at night. She's shamed. That boy. Elias didn't let him finish. He's a boy. That's all. The preacher sighed. You'll lose standing. Elias looked toward the barn, where the boy's laugh had just rung out, quick and wild and free. Then I'll stand somewhere else. That evening, she brought in the laundry just before the snow returned. The sky had turned lavender at the edges, wind scraping over the fields like memory. Preacher came today, Elias said from a porch. She nodded. He's been asking around, wondering if I plan to stay. You do. I don't know what staying means anymore. It means the boy wakes up warm. She turned, brow furrowed. Means you have your hands in the garden come spring. Means I keep fixing what's broken without asking if it's mine. She held his gaze, long and searching. I'm not clean, she said, even if the papers say I'm free. I've never known clean to be so honest. She said nothing, but her shoulders settled, as if something had loosened. Micah, that name still only in her chest, ran across the yard just then, boots thudding, face flushed from cold and joy. He's not afraid anymore, she murmured. Good. You did that. No, Elias said. You did. She watched the boy spin once in the snow, then looked at Elias, really looked. His name's Micah. Elias didn't smile, but his eyes softened. A good name, he said. Strong. She looked down. He never had a chance to hear it before. Not like that. Not where he was wanted. Elias picked up a piece of firewood and split it clean. The sound echoed. He'll hear it now, he said. And for the first time, she believed that might be true. The storm announced itself not with thunder, but with stillness. The kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Clouds gathered like bruises above the hills, and the wind curled low and cold around the ranch, as if testing for weakness. By afternoon, snow began to fall, slow, dry, relentless. Inside the barn, Micah's breath had turned shallow. She pressed her hand to his forehead. Heat swelled under her palm, far too hot. His eyes fluttered open only halfway, the whites tinged red, and his skin had lost all color. Micah, she whispered, brushing back his damp curls. Baby. No answer. Panic tightened around her ribs like rope. She bundled him in every spare quilt she had, then grabbed water from the pail. He didn't drink. His lips were cracked, and his throat worked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. His small body shivered even beneath the weight of wool and hay. The barn walls creaked under the storm's fists. Outside, the wind screamed over the plains, throwing snow in sharp fists against the wood. She pulled him closer and began to hum, the same broken tune from nights before. Her fingers shook as she tried to wet a cloth and press it to his lips. Nothing worked. The fever was ablaze inside him now, burning away everything else. She was so wrapped in desperation, she didn't hear the door open. Elias stood in the doorway, shoulders dusted white. Behind him, the wind curled in with menace, but he didn't flinch. He looked at her, then at Micah, and set down a steaming kettle of water he'd carried from the house. Bring him inside, he said. She hesitated. You'll both freeze out here, Elias added. There's no pride in losing him to cold. Her legs moved before she could argue. She wrapped Micah as tight as she could and followed Elias into the storm. Snow hit her like nails. The walk to the house felt 10 miles long. Her boots sank in white drifts up to the ankles. Micah didn't stir. His face, against her chest, was hot as a coal. When Elias opened the door, heat hit her like a slap. She stumbled into it. He cleared a space near the hearth. The fire was already high, wood snapping with fury. He laid Micah on a folded quilt and added more logs. Get the wet clothes off, he said. She worked quickly, fingers numb. Elias handed her another blanket, thick and smelling faintly of cedar. Micah moaned. He's burning, she said. I know. She pressed her forehead to the floor beside him, rocking slightly. I should have seen it earlier, she murmured. I waited too long. You stayed with him. I didn't know what else to do. That was enough. They sat through the night in shifts. Elias kept the kettle hot, spooned water between Micah's lips, and laid cold cloths on his head. She whispered old songs and prayers she thought she'd forgotten. The storm outside roared like some bitter god had come looking for them. At some point before dawn, Micah coughed. A wet, rattling sound, but it was something. Then again. She grabbed his hand. Micah. His eyes fluttered open, dull but present. Mama, he croaked. She burst into tears, not loud ones, but the kind that fall slow and grateful. He's back, she whispered to Elias. He'll stay. Micah drank half a cup of broth before sleep took him again. But his breathing steadied. His skin cooled. The fever had broken. She sat slumped beside him, lids heavy, when Elias offered her a cup of tea. Her hands shook taking it. I never told you everything, she said. Her voice was low, cracked. Elias waited. I don't know who fathered him, she said. They passed us around. Whoever owned the house, his brother, his guests. There's no kindness in not knowing, only emptiness. He didn't respond. I named him for someone I never met, a man in a Bible story who survived everything. I didn't want him to carry their names. Only strength. He's got that, Elias said. I wanted to leave, she continued. The day you brought us here, I planned to stay only long enough to get well. I thought if I stayed too long, I'd ruin you. You haven't. But I'm marked. Elias looked at her, firelight catching the lines on his face. So am I. The quiet settled again, warm this time. Micah stirred and murmured her name in sleep. She stroked his hair. You saved him, she said to Elias. I just gave him heat. You gave him time. They sat like that until the wind died down. By morning, the sun broke through a torn corner sky. The snow sparkled undisturbed, like the world had been rewritten. Micah slept still, peaceful, wrapped in layers of warmth. She stood slowly and walked to the window. The storm had left white across every field, every rooftop. It made the world look untouched, even if it wasn't. I've carried shame so long, she said almost to herself. I forgot what it's like not to feel it every step. He joined her by the window. That boy, Elias said, doesn't know your shame. Only your voice. Your hand. She looked down at her raw fingers. I was never allowed to call myself a mother. You are now. They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the sun rise over snow that hadn't yet been disturbed by steps. Behind them, a boy breathed steady. And something began again, not loudly, not grand, but sure as morning. The snow hadn't yet melted, though the sky had softened. Morning came a little earlier now, and birds had begun to test their voices again, quiet chirps from bare trees. Inside the house, Micah built towers from kindling and knocked them over with laughter that still surprised her. His cheeks had color again. His feet, once cautious on Elias's floor, now padded confidently between table and hearth. She had begun to hum while doing chores. It wasn't a song, just a tune stitched from peace, from watching her son smile. Elias was quieter than usual. He rose early, fed the stock, chopped wood, but lingered longer by the barn door. Sometimes he just watched her tend to the garden beds she'd started clearing, though spring was weeks away. He watched like a man memorizing a moment. Then came the rider. Dust on his coat, gloves too clean, a voice like spoiled milk. I'm Josiah Marrow, the man announced, sliding off his horse as if dismounting from a throne. Representative of Caro and Sons. I believe you're housing a woman and child under disputed claim. Elias didn't flinch. He stepped off the porch, hands bare, coat unbuttoned. They're not yours. The man smiled the way rattlesnakes stretch their jaws. Actually, by contract inheritance, the boy falls under property carried forward from prior labor arrangements. That makes him collectible. And she's free. Free illegally, Marrow replied, unfolding a paper with red wax still intact. The auction was unauthorized. A banker overstepped. Caro and Sons holds full rights to her indenture. That includes any product of her time and service, the boy included. From the barn, she stepped out slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd heard every word. Micah clung behind her, peeking out, face already pale. Elias didn't turn. Marrow's eyes lit up when he saw her. There now. Best to make this clean. Turn the child over, and we won't press charges for harboring fugitive debt." Her breath caught. She stepped forward. "I'm not property," she said, voice firm. "Neither is he." Marrow gave her a patronizing smile. "Legally, you were never freed. The man who bought you had no right to grant it. And the child, well, he's born a bond, not bloodline. That makes him ours." Elias reached into his coat. The motion was slow, deliberate, final. The butt of his revolver showed first, then the full draw. No threat, no shout, just the stillness of a man whose decision was already made. "Get back on your horse," Elias said. Marrow's smirk vanished. "You draw over this?" he asked. "A woman and a bastard boy." Elias didn't blink. "Say it again." "I dare you." Marrow hesitated. Behind Elias, the woman stepped closer, voice rising not in panic, but in fire. "You want the truth?" she said. "You want to know what you're trying to own?" She took another step. "I was passed between hands before I bled my first moon. I bore a child I never got to name aloud until last week. I scrubbed floors with broken ribs. I gave birth in a shed behind a house that burned with my silence still hanging in its rafters. And I ran, not for me, but for him." Micah's hand tightened in hers. "You don't own my child," she said. "You don't own my shame. And you don't own the woman I've become under this roof." The snow around them sparkled with afternoon sun, quiet witnesses to a truth too long buried. Marrow shifted, looked between her and Elias, then at the drawn gun still pointed calm and steady. "You'll regret this," Marrow said. Elias gave a small nod. "Maybe. But you'll regret staying." Marrow mounted without another word, spurred his horse, left behind a storm of kicked snow and a silence deeper than the one before. Inside, Elias reholstered his weapon. Micah stepped forward, staring up at him. "Mr. Boone," he asked, voice small. Elias crouched. Micah whispered something, barely audible. His mother heard it. She covered her mouth. "Say it again, son," Elias said gently. Micah cleared his throat. "Could I have your name?" Elias's eyes flickered. Then he smiled, slow and warm like the first sunrise after weeks of cold. "You can," he said, "if it fits you." Micah grinned and nodded. She stood still, hand trembling on the doorframe. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I did," Elias replied. "There's no other way I'd sleep tonight." Later, while Micah played with the dogwood branch Elias had carved him, she and Elias stood on the porch. "You ever want anything in return?" she asked. He shook his head. "Already got it." "What's that?" "A boy with my name," he said, "and a house with laughter again." She looked toward the field, where footprints now led in sets of 3, and she let herself smile without fear. The church bells rang like they always had, steady, deliberate, as if the sound alone could scrub clean the souls of Sunaway. But this Sunday, something in the air felt different. The sky was pale blue, but the wind carried hush instead of him. Folks filled the pews faster than usual, not just for scripture, but for the story that had already found its way into every corner of the town. They said Elias Boone had pulled a gun on an Easterner. They said the woman he'd taken in had spoken fire and truth. And now she was coming to church, with the boy and the man both. They arrived together, just past the second bell. Elias in his dark coat, wide-brimmed, hat low over his eyes. The boy, Micah, walking between them, hand in each of theirs. The woman wore a plain dress, soft gray with patches of deep blue stitched into the hem. She'd brushed her hair back and tied it with twine. No lace, no bonnet. Just pride. The whispers began before they reached the steps. There she is. After what happened? In God's house. But no one stopped them. No one dared. She didn't walk with her head down. She held it level, each step deliberate, as if she were counting how many times the world had tried to break her, and how many times she'd said not yet. At the church doors, the preacher cleared his throat to speak. But before he could offer greeting or warning, she turned and stepped up onto the stone platform just beneath the cross. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the murmuring crowd like sunlight on frost. "I have something to say before we pray." Gasps. shifting feet. A silence rolled over the churchyard, as if the wind itself was waiting to hear her. She looked out at them, not with defiance, but clarity. "I was sold in this very town," she said. "Stood on a box like a mule, while you all looked the other way. Some of you watched. Some of you laughed. None of you stopped it. A few looked down. Most did not. I had a boy beside me," she continued, "and not one of you asked his name." She glanced toward Elias, toward Micah. "I came here empty, not just in pocket, but in heart. I was used, discarded, left with nothing but a child and silence. I didn't expect kindness. I didn't believe in mercy." She paused, and then a man raised his hand, not to strike, not to own, but to lift. Elias stood still, jaw set, eyes steady on her. "He brought me and my son to his land, fed us, asked nothing, gave more than I ever knew a man could without ever once demanding gratitude, or obedience, or my body." She looked out over the crowd again. "You called me a woman of shame. You whispered that I'd poisoned his house. You gossiped like your tongues were scripture." The preacher stiffened. "I say this now, so the boy behind me never has to wonder if his mother hid." She turned, took Micah's hand, and pulled him gently beside her. "His name is Micah Boone. He was born of sorrow, but he lives in light. He carries a name given not in blood, but in choice, in dignity." Tears came now, scattered across the crowd. One woman sobbed into her gloves. A child clung to her mother's leg, confused but listening. She bent slightly, whispering something to Micah. The boy looked out at the crowd and said, small but proud, "I'm not property. I'm her son." A murmur swelled like wind through trees. But it wasn't judgment. It was awe. She stood tall again. "I don't ask your forgiveness. I don't need it. I just want you to know what a woman becomes when she is finally seen." She stepped down from the church platform, took Elias's arm, and walked forward into the church. The crowd parted. Not one soul dared block their path. Inside, the pews filled behind them. But no one spoke of God that morning, at least not the way they usually did. Instead, they spoke of a woman who once stood on a box, and now stood beside a man without fear. Later, the preacher would call her testimony a reckoning. Others would call it a beginning. Outside, after the sermon was done and Micah had dozed against Elias's shoulder, she stood by the door, saying nothing, just standing, letting the townsfolk walk past her and see her as she was now. Not sold, not broken, just standing. An older woman with a bent back and tears on her cheeks paused beside her. "You're brave," she said. "No," the woman replied. "Just tired of being quiet." That night, Elias sat on the porch, whittling wood into nothing in particular. She joined him. "Think they'll talk?" she asked. "They already are." "And what about tomorrow?" He looked out over the fading fields. "They'll remember." Micah played with the dog again, laughing as he chased it through patches of soft snow. "He calls you Papa now," she said. "He can," Elias replied, "if he wants." She leaned against the railing, the shawl around her shoulders fluttering gently. "You gave him more than your name." "No," Elias said. "You did that. I just offered a place for it to grow." They watched the horizon together, where the last light folded gently behind the hills. Somewhere down in town, the story was already becoming legend. It would be told and retold, embellished, rewritten, but the truth would linger like wood smoke. That a woman with no name gave voice to a whole town's silence. That a boy born to nothing was loved into something new. And that a quiet man, who never raised his voice, changed everything with a single gesture. Sometimes, grace doesn't come like thunder. It walks in quietly, with a child's hand, a woman's truth, and the courage to stay.